You can email me all night. My phone was just binging all night long with people. Rick, why did you show that? Because it's news. I'm not going to censor the news just to make you feel better. Let's bring our guest for the night in. Here's Grant. Hello, sir. How are you tonight? No audio, Grant. I can't hear you.
My bad. You're having controversy already, I see.
Every day there's always something. There's never a dull moment.
Good to see you and Happy New Year.
And to you as well. It's great to have you back. I'm grateful for you being here tonight. And because you've been traveling, you've been very busy. You went down to, I guess, Washington, right? So let's start there. What was that all about?
You know what? I didn't actually get down to Washington. I was down doing some meetings down in Texas. And whenever I saw everything unraveling, or, a lot of the events had unraveled and canceled, and the tickets that I had been given kindly started to get reshuffled, it just became I don't, and I'm pretty sure if I go to the event, I won't be anywhere other than watching it on a screen somewhere. So I just thought, I'll come back to Canada. And so it worked out. But it was certainly an interesting thing speaking to Americans about what Trump's doing, what he's saying about the 51st state. And I think that's a great conversation. I'm not sure where you'd like to go tonight, Rick, but I think it's an amazing conversation for us to be having about the optics of how Canada is receiving that message, and also I think what Trump's intentions are with it, and I think how the Americans perceive it. So there's a lot of apertures there to have this conversation,
Yeah, I'm very excited to speak with you about it, to get your views, your thoughts. I think we need your voice here, frankly, especially in light of the cracks that we're seeing in, I guess, unity between our politicians here in Canada. I see real danger there, really, because I think it's putting strain on the country already, and we haven't even really entered into any kind of negotiations. But before we get to that, let's explain to people again who you are and what you represent, which is the United Party of Canada.
Yeah, that's right, Rick. We first met when I was running in the leadership race, the Conservative Party, in 2022. And you kindly did an interview then in terms of that journey and the raising of all that money. The message that I was communicating in 2022 in terms of what our real problems are in Canada, and how I saw grassroots Canadians responding to the discussions about the real problems in Canada, whether it's our economy or an overbearing government abusing our charter, or whether it's coercion into vaccines or whatever. That message is very interestingly very palatable still for Canadians. It's actually been a part of building a new party called the United Party of Canada, which I'm the leader of. And I've spent really the last 2 years, I wrote a book that's called The Battle for the Soul of Canada. I just brought it to do a quick picture. If you want to take a look at it, let the viewers see it. There it is.
Here, actually.
I wrote that book in 2023, and it's called Firing the Forge, Battle for the Soul of Canada, Firing the Forge. And that's a really key topic right now, because we're facing a situation now where we've got a U.S. president kidding about us being a 51st state, and we've got really a meltdown in the UK following some of Elon Musk's comments about King Charles resigning or abdicating his crown, and these Muslim grooming gangs of white girls in England that have been going on, which has really unsettled the British people in relation to the need for the crown. And it raises a really interesting question for us as Canadians. What would happen when we're squeezed between a president who wants to talk about Canada becoming the 51st state and a UK that suddenly decides that it no longer needs the British monarchy? So that forging that I'm talking about in that book is the precursor to a discussion about Canada actually losing the crown, reforging the nation, becoming a constitutional republic. And maybe that's part of our conversation tonight too. I'm happy to go there. But, I'm I have stepped out into this discussion in Canada with this new party and have really been coast to coast, talking to Canadians about where we're at, what the issues are. And I'm loving this right now because what's actually happening is these issues, the real issues that we're dealing with in the country, not just axe the tax and, we got to deal with carbon. We're having doors blown off by Trump saying, you know what, the Green New Deal is dead. Where does that leave Carney, even in relation to his business? And we've got this little ploy going on where the Liberals are trying to switch and bait us with a new prime minister. But we've also got Trump, who is leaving the Paris Climate Accord, leaving the UN, leaving the WHO. Where does that put the Conservatives and Poilievre? The real discussions are what he's talking about. They're two sexes. We need to fix our border. We got to stop human trafficking. We got to stop fentanyl. We've got to stop the death cult that is anti-human and destroying our country. We will be wealthy. We will be secure in this country, but we need to actually deal with the real issues. So Trump is reshaping the conservative conversation in the West. And I think it's very good because it's given a real neck snap to the kind of what I would call self-absorbed, myopic conservative thinkers in Canada who all they're worried about has been the Liberals and how bad Trudeau is. We really need to look at a new space for these discussions around what conservatism is in Canada and recognize that the Conservative Party that was formed 25 years ago was formed because it brought people together that were fiscally conservative, but also people that had social conservative values, and it was meant to be a fusion. And actually, the party has left half of the membership. And this is the space that I find myself working in because that membership is disgruntled. Everybody wants to have a strong economy and lower taxes. For sure, we need to fix that, and for sure we can. But the real issues are the ones that aren't being discussed in the Conservative Party. And this is what the United Party is about. It's about bringing that responsible fiscal conservatism into the public space, but actually having the real conversations that will give us our country back, and the value framework that supports keeping our country. And I'm probably now of the view, and I'm seeing the ground prepared, where we actually really need to have a conversation about changing our constitutional framework.
And what do you mean by that? How far do you take the change of the Constitution?
I think my view, we need to move Canada from being just barely a country to becoming a nation. And maybe it's time for a real conversation about losing the crown and moving towards being a constitutional republic.
When you say barely a country and move toward a nation, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, sure. If you look at our history, you see a whole stream of constitutional documentation. Some provinces have signed it in the Order of Quebec. If you go back into the Westminster Act of 1931, you see the British Crown passing the sovereignty of Canada to the provincial legislatures in the nation. And whatever happened to the impact of that legislation patriating our sovereignty back to Canadians? Like there's some history to revisit in terms of the epicenter of power that has been created in central Canada and the entire system of the equalization payments, and also the need for the electoral reform needs to change. And I think this is part of the discussion. I know people get freaked out if you say to them about changing, what does it mean to change the Constitution? We've had our Constitution obliterated. I mean, it's been changed. The social contract in terms of what we understood our relationship with our government's already gone. So let's not be timid little people of the Shire in thinking that we can just go back to normal with all these holes blown out the side of our constitutional framework. We've been abused. We've had our bank accounts frozen. We're having people locked up for mischief. Whatever it is you want to talk about. If you want to talk about vaccine injuries, you want to talk about the coercion of the vaccine, you want to talk about all the evidence that's coming out right now in terms of how little work was done in terms of the preparation of the mRNA treatments. I mean, we know it. We look at the insurance actuarial tables in the last 5 years, and you can see the deviations in death. They're huge. Well, there's got to be a correlative link. So these conversations aren't being had in Canada right now, other than the what's the group out of Manitoba that did the National Citizens Inquiry, which did a great job. But no one's looking at that information, and we need to be talking about that stuff. So let's talk about some of the truth issues, and then we can actually do an assessment of where we're at in the country. Because how do we build a nation when we've had that kind of drive-through holes created, certainty around our constitutional understandings? It's time to take the next step in this nation.
So when you say a constitutional republic, what does that look like to you? Are we talking about something similar in nature to what they have in the U.S.? And if that's the case, why don't we just join the United States then?
Well, I don't think that we're meant to be. I'm sure there's other constitutional republics out there in the world. It doesn't mean because they're a constitutional republic they need to join the U.S. I just think we need to consolidate the values that we have as a people and protect our borders and our people and our wealth, and start talking about some of these issues in terms of foreign ownership of our minerals and our agricultural land, getting rid of this Foreign Interference Protection Act so we don't have foreign troops embedded in our nation, concerning the Americans about a porous invasion from our northern border. I mean, this is actually the conversation about Trump and tariffs. And this is why I'm very interested in the fact that Trump is engaging the Canadian politic with a discussion about tariffs, because what he's actually doing is he's forcing the real value issues onto Canada to deal with it. And he's driving it to a place that it hurts, because it's going to hurt us in our wallets if suddenly there's a tariff wall up with trade with the U.S. But what he's really asking is, let's drugs. Let's deal with human trafficking. Let's deal with violent criminals coming across from the U.S. border. He's probably being quite gracious and not engaging. I know from my own conversations down in the U.S. and with some of the intelligence information that I get, that the Americans are deeply concerned about the foreign troops based in Canada. We'd like to just kind of ignore that and say, well, that's probably a conspiracy theory. But I don't think they think it's a conspiracy theory. So, if you really want to have a conversation about, and I think you do, about tariffs, there's a conversation within that conversation that I think that our current realm of leaders aren't having at all. And it's those deeper issues. It's not really about trade. It's about returning Canada to a trusted border.
And it's about a tug of war between ideologies, really. Not just in Canada, but internationally, wouldn't you say? It's between liberalism or maybe progressivism and more traditional orthodox values?
Well, I would call it a tension between what we call that the concept of globalism or collectivism, which is really that diminishment of the understanding of the value of human life. And then what has been our traditional worldview in Canada or the U.S., which is we have an identity with value because we're created in the image of God. Therefore, we have inalienable rights that flow from God, and the government should not be replacing that understanding of the supremacy of God as articulated in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and Constitution with them, which is exactly what's happening. And this is what you see Trump warring against in his language. And it's good and evil. This is light and darkness, good and evil. And Canada actually needs to wake up and have that conversation. Again, that's why I called the book The Battle for the Soul of Canada, because this is a conversation about where actually is our values. What is valuable? Is it just economic output, or is it the fact that we've built this country based on building families that build communities, that build great places to live? And the reason those families are valuable is because people have inherent values. And that's why we need to talk about values in the country. Stephen Harper said in 2003 in his Civitas speech, he basically said any serious conservative party is going to talk about values. And then went on to not talk about values. And now we have Harper 2.0, basically in the form of Pierre Poilievre, where he only talks about acts of tax. He doesn't talk about foreign interference. He's not getting the security clearance to tell us who the 11 people are that are potentially elected MPs that we might be voting for. He's not talking about the NSICOP report, where we have ample evidence of severe and sustained foreign interference that's undermining our democratic and political processes. What kind of leadership is that? I mean, there's all kinds of arguments that are raised to say, well, he's not allowed to all of that. If you and I were both sitting having that conversation in your place in Ontario, and we started seeing Chinese troops coming over the countryside to invade, we wouldn't be thinking about, well, it's wrong to shoot and to kill someone. We'd be saying, no, we need to defend our country. We have a defense to actually firing a gun against an imposing military army coming into our country. And in the same way, if there's traitors in this country that are working to undermine the actual sovereignty of our nation, then that information needs to be disclosed and brought forward. This whole concept of hiding behind this potential sentencing of 14 years, well, there's defenses for that. It's called necessity. That's what leaders do, is they take decisions and say, yeah, well, normally we do that to protect it so people aren't telling the wrong things at the wrong times to the wrong people. But if you're the leader of the loyal opposition, and you know that there's people in your party or in this government that we're about to vote on in terms of an impending election, you're not losing it. Why? It just smells bad. So these are the big issues, and this is the whole problem with just saying, well, all we got to do is get rid of Trudeau, because now we've got rid of Trudeau almost. If we see Mark Carney slide into that position, we're going to have something infinitely worse and intelligent to boot, and we're going to be dealing with the exact same agenda towards moving towards the selling of our sovereignty. That is what Trudeau meant when he said Canada is going to be the first post-nation state. He said that in 2018. This is the war of collectivism, globalism, and the shifting and migrating of our nation into a serfdom, a fiefdom of the UN. And I'm not doing that. That's why I'm doing this. This is why we started the party. This is why we're talking about this tonight. For me, it is anyways. We need to have these real conversations and say no to this stuff and call it what it is. The problem is the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about this, and Poilievre only wants to get elected. And in my view, I think the Conservative Party has been hijacked. I was raised in a conservative family, Reform, then Conservative, and was actually on an EDA out in Western Canada. So it's not like I haven't been a part of the establishment, but what I did was I saw inside that machine, and what I saw was I'm questioning the intentions. I think there's been a hijacking, and I think the silencing of the discussion around these very important issues for our nation is the most concerning thing in the country. We will, with the right leadership, drop the taxes. We will return to wealth. We will return to security. Yes, we can drill, baby, drill. We can get our economy going. We can develop our technology. We can return our industry. We can do all of those things and grow wealth. But if we're selling out our nation and our sovereignty, as has been clearly declared, and there's no compromise, there's no comment from the Conservative Party criticizing it, at some point your analysis has to move from, well, are they lazy? Is that why they're not talking about it? Are they stupid? Don't they see it? Oh, maybe they're just negligent. No, okay, maybe they're just bad MPs. They're reckless. Once you start to work through that framework of mind, at some point you arrive at complicit. So that's where I've got to. There's no explanation for not actually starting to seriously deal with these issues. And I think what Trump is doing with the tariff issue is he's driving at this globalist agenda in Canada. I think what Trump wants to really talk about are things like water and our border and a security dome for the continent. That's what he wants to really talk about. He's just playing games. He's taunting the establishment, and it's sending the establishment, we'll call it the Laurentian elites, the liberals, who don't mind our flag being burnt by Palestinians, to now all of a sudden be super patriotic and say we need to protect Canada. Give me a break. Give me a break. They've been actively facilitating the breakdown of this nation, the deconstruction of this nation. This is why we actually have to have this fight and have these conversations. And this is why this actually really riles me up, because we're going to lose our country. We don't have these conversations. And Trump is bringing this conversation to the table, because what it's done now is it's making Mark Carney look like he doesn't have anything to offer, because basically this carbon myth has just been blown out by saying the Green New Deal's dead and banks are pulling out of it. How's that gonna be an offering for Canadians when the U.S. economy is basically saying no to it? And now we've got Poilievre, which all he can do is say is axe the tax. And it has nothing to do, he's not going to be able to fix the tariffs by saying we axe the tax, because he's got to deal with the issues like immigration. And we all know that he's incredibly compromised on the immigration discussion, right? He's been flip-flopping around on that like crazy. So we just need some clarity, and we need to actually break down these problems and see that what Canadians are being fed politically from these mainstream legacy parties is a pile of BS.
So we've talked about the tariff issue a little bit, but woven into that is this 51st state overlay. How do you view that? And isn't that in itself a potential threat to Canadian sovereignty? When he's talking about annexation and literally sits there and says, I'm not joking, and we might use economic force, not military force, but economic force in order to affect that.
I think it's a ruse. You know what? I think he's taunting the Canadian establishment to push on the big issues that are the security threats to the government. That's what he's doing. I don't think he wants to subsume or take over Canada. I don't think he does. I think we are a brother nation. And I would certainly be resistant to any overture like that was serious. I think what he's doing is he's playing some brinkmanship with the established dysfunctional political parties, and they don't know what to do with it, because they know very quickly it's going to come home to roost, because all of their constituents are going to be screaming, because it's going to impact the businesses that are doing business with the U.S. And they can't just hide in their political glass towers whenever everyone is dealing with a 25% tariff. So, I mean, that's a view. I mean, I don't think the discussions about the tariffs at all. If you listen to his inauguration speech yesterday, he was very careful to say he's only going to put troops on the southern border. He discussed in detail what he thought about Panama and the breaching of the arrangement that was made with the Panamanians whenever the Panama Canal was given to them, the amount of American lives that were lost giving, and the fact that American ships are being kind of punished in their transition. Now the Chinese are running it. He's calling it a sphere of influence security risk. But he didn't say anything like that about Canada. So the hysteria that we're hearing in Canada, and I suppose the ruffled feathers that are going on in Conservative Party right now because Mark Carney's coming in, is being driven in many ways by this discussion about tariffs. But I don't believe that tariffs are the real issue. I think Trump is pushing on a place that there is tender for Canadians. But what he's asking for is sort out your border. And what's the thing? I want human trafficking stopped. I want fentanyl stop moving into the U.S. I want dangerous criminals not moving into the U.S. I don't want a porous border, and I don't think it's that difficult. But the question we should be asking as Canadians is, why would we tolerate any government in this nation? We already have, sadly, for a long time. But why would, in our right minds, would we really tolerate any government that wouldn't want to fix those things?
it's not just Canada, though. He's focused on Mexico. He's focused on
Sure.
China.
Sure.
I think other nations as well. And he's establishing this Department of External Revenue Service, the ERS.
Yeah.
I'm having a little trouble with that. I don't think anyone has ever done that before. So good luck to him. How do you view it?
Well, I think that I think it's been that protectionist agenda has been a policy of the U.S. McKinley, whom he renamed the mountain for, was famous for that. I know for sure the British Empire worked a lot with tariffs for items being imported into its holdings, and it's an economic tool. And unless we have someone who can credibly sit down and have a conversation with President Trump about what it is he really wants, what Americans really want from Canada, I think we're going to be doing kind of this chicken dance that we're currently seeing. And I don't think that the threat right now is anywhere as real as people are perceiving it to be, except for those that are actually trying to undermine this nation by trading our sovereignty into the U.S., into the UN. And the UN is we are moving into post-nationalism. It's happening all the time through the treaties that are being signed.
True enough. How would you approach this then? Because right now we have Danielle Smith and Kevin O'Leary on one side and the premiers and the prime minister on the other premiers. And the prime minister sort of on the other, and there's this divide. And
I think Kevin O'Leary is a businessman trying to do a business deal, and he probably sees sovereignty in terms of Canada being its own country as something that is a tradable commodity. It is not. I think that we haven't tapped into our wealth. I think in some ways we're naive as a nation. The very fact that everybody wants the country is indication enough that we should be fighting for it. And that's the whole point of globalism. Is they want the access to the wealth. They want the people displaced and powerless so they can access our, our water or our minerals or the minerals that have been undiscovered. And it's exactly the same with the United States, but it's going to require strength to say, we need to really get real and also work with the Americans, because I think one of the things that President Trump wants to talk about is oil. He wants to talk about water and security, and I think those are the defining issues. And I think that there needs to be someone who will actually sit down and have a let's get real conversation about what you're really trying to do, because America is not going to get wealth from get rich from putting tariffs on Canada when we're so interconnected on so many levels. I mean, it'll make some money, but it'll hurt them in other areas. So, there's a message here for Canada too. We also need to be diversifying and not be so codependent on the U.S., right? And that's one of the problems that we've had with the Liberal government and not developing our liquefied natural gas, because the whole world's looking for it and we have tons of it. So I don't worry about the Kevin O'Learys. I think Danielle Smith is doing her best for Alberta when she's in a hostile context with the federal government that is working against Alberta. I'm not convinced that her efforts with President Trump going down to Mar-a-Lago bought us an extra 10 days. I think that's probably just Trump being more gracious rather than cavalier. And in a sense, I don't want to see Canada punished. But if that tariff drives the bigger discussions in our nation to actually dislodge the ridiculous legacy political infrastructure that we have in this country, I think that's a good thing, because we need to lose the disconnectedness of the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party, because they're not helping us. One is selling the country out and the other one's letting us be sold out.
So specifically, what would you be doing right now?
If I were prime minister right now, what would I be doing?
Yeah.
I'd be sorting out the border. I'd be identifying the very dangerous criminals that are in our country. and making sure that we're not dealing with criminals that are illegally in this country. I'd be dealing with immigration and being very clear about connecting the development of our immigration to an economic strategic plan that actually suited Canada and would help Canada grow. I would deport anybody whose visa was running out or wasn't here legally. I'd probably have a moratorium on immigration until we actually saw where we were actually at. I'd be sitting down with President Trump and saying, look, what is it that you really need? We are going to fix these issues. We are going to develop our own defense infrastructure so you don't feel vulnerable at your northern border. I would be developing our military to actually protect our nation and our people, including the Arctic. Where would I stop? There's so many things that would actually be in harmony with the view that I see articulated by President Trump in terms of returning this country to an amazing place to live. There were tremendous policy statements that were made yesterday that would unravel some of the lunacy in our nation right now.
What role do the premiers have to play in all of this?
Well, if we're talking about reforging Canada, I think we need to get power back down to the people. I see a very small federal government. I see devolved powers back to the provinces, so those decisions are much closer to where people live, and I would see stronger premiers. But right now, we need leadership to actually get us out of this boiling cauldron that we're in, that we're being traded, our sovereignty is being traded out on, and we need to take the steps now to mitigate and remove the threat to the nation and to consolidate our strengths so we can take the steps we need to do to set up the nation for the next 200 years. And this is my vision of actually seeing this kind of our fragile concept of a country move into nationhood.
So what sets your vision and your party apart from, say, like the PPC or even MAGA for that matter, but specifically here in Canada, what is it that about your party that you think is better or will help the nation more?
Well, I think one of the premier issues in terms of the PPC, there's a couple of them, is that I carefully believe that we need to protect our agricultural infrastructure in Canada. I don't believe in the breakage of the farm maintenance agreements. I think our food security is a huge deal. The whole concept of our integrated agricultural system needs to be protected for Canadians, and that includes ownership of Canadian agricultural land. And so I'd like to see that totally returned to Canadians. We should not have security threats that are flowing out of foreign ownership of our agricultural land or having land lay fallow because someone just wants to put land in a land bank. That's a big issue. I think the PPC would like to see, like most bankers or anybody who hasn't grown food, they just think it's a commodity and therefore the lowest price is what wins. What we need to do is clean up our food chain, remove all the additives and all the ridiculous stuff that gets added to our food that actually causes health issues, and return to a healthier, more whole food chain. And we don't get that by just, trying to compete with a southern competitor that's 10 times our size. We need to protect our farmers, and that is for me, that's a non-negotiable. It just makes so much sense. I think the other discussion.
So just to be clear, what you mean by that is you're looking at maintaining marketing boards and supply management programs.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I am talking about that until we have a really close look at that, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, we need to just compete better and break these apart. What we'll do is we'll end up losing our family farms and the producers that are in Canada, and we'll move to huge corporate farms, which then are vulnerable to quality. And there's examples of this where we've been protected in Canada because of the standards that we have that protect our farmers and prices. And one of the issues recently was eggs out on the West Coast. And there was some kind of a virus in the American egg system, and they were competing on price. So therefore, there was some challenge within the molecular structure of the egg, and they lost their eggs. And Canada was able to continue because of the standards that was in place that we could pay that little bit extra for to actually protect the quality of the food. And so there's lessons there. And if you've ever been a farmer, you'll know what it takes to grow quality food. And so that's not something that can just get outsourced. And my other question for us, is for all Canadians, is look at what we've learned about offshoring our light industry. Right? We sent that all off to China or Vietnam or wherever because it was cheaper because of labor prices. And now those economies are developing, the labor prices are going up, and now it's not competitive, except now we have to buy it back at higher prices, and we've lost entire sectors in our own country. It's exactly the same for food, except that we have a fuse on food where it punishes us because we don't have healthy food. We can't control the inputs into our food. And if we're left short, we've got about 3 days till everyone starts freaking out. So that is something that's a national security issue as well as just an agricultural issue. So that's a big issue, big difference issue with the PPC. And I think the other issue is more philosophical if you want to have a conversation about that. And that's that. Mm-hmm. That is this discussion about what are we really talking about in terms of libertarianism versus those people that believe that there actually is a God that is the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And this brings us to these kinds of conversations like what is actually the moral framework for a discussion about libertarianism? It's actually the elevation of self. It's a deification of self. It's a sad example, but one of my favorite examples of shallow values at work is the scenario of that Ottawa MP that ran in the 2021 election. I think his name was David Yeo, Y-E-O, if I remember correctly. And he ran in an Ottawa riding on the mandate of freedom for the PPC. And then it was discovered that while he was running for the PPC, waving a freedom flag for all Canadians, he was developing the app that would basically put in bondage any Canadian that chose not to take the vaccine. He was developing the Arrive Can app and being paid handsomely for it. So, where is our, that deeper responsibility and duty and conscience to Canadians? It's not just about self and the money, etc. And so this is where I think value conversations are very important. And I think that this is a big conversation for Canadians in terms of recognizing that we have a lot of our problems that we're dealing with now in the country, whether you believe in God or not. The value framework that flows from the understanding of the supremacy of God and the rule of law is what has allowed our nation to actually have certainty of contract. It's allowed us to have an imported value placed on human beings. And you start to strip that away and you start to lose the ability to say no to things because you don't have a value justification to say no to them. This is exactly now why we can't actually have conversations in Canada about militant Islam. The best we can say is we're opposed to anti-Semitism. Wasn't that great? We've got our streets actually hating our nation and burning our flag. But we can't actually talk about it because we'll be called an Islamophobe. And I don't know if you've been to any countries in the Middle East. I can see why they want to come to Canada. But why wouldn't we be saying no to them? And this is the challenge with a vacuous moral framework that emanates from a libertarian discussion. So that's a huge piece in terms of a discussion around what is the PPC. And when I looked at starting this party with a bunch of other Canadians, that was one of the key pieces that we need to be talking about.
This is kind of the balancing act, though, always in politics and society, though, is when you start saying no, some people get nervous because it becomes an issue of freedom, self-determination, personal sovereignty, I guess. so where does that line get drawn, and who gets to say that, and how do you have a free society? I think people, just to put it in kind of simpler terms, when you start talking about God in the context of anything government, people look for that separation of church and state. They worry that one religion starts to dominate another, or that so is there, how do you have freedom of religion if you're saying no to one group but not another, and how do you address that? So I'll just I'm looking for just some feedback on that from you.
Well, I think that's a great question, because if you want to break down one faith set to another, we have freedom of religion in Canada, because Canada was formed as a Christian nation, and the concept of the supremacy of God that's written up in our Constitution, which refers to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that God says, you have the completely free will to not choose me. And that, by extension, is what allows us to have freedom of religion. So this isn't some overlay of some kind of faith overlay. The value of the Christian faith is that you're free to not choose faith, or whatever faith you want. Mm-hmm. But I'm yet to see a country in the last 1,000 years where there has been a migration of a militant Islam, let's call it for the sake of this conversation, where at some point there hasn't been a binary choice given.
Yes.
So where, and at what point, by the other inverted part of your question is, who gets to say no? The real question is, how long can we say yes until someone tells us gives us an ultimatum? Mm-hmm. So I think I'm very happy with the value framework of freedom that we've had up until about 15 years ago. And it was based on the value framework that we've all grown up with. And we shouldn't be afraid to return to that. So it's not about, some overlay of, some kind of Christian fiefdom. It's about returning to the values that built this country and that flowed out of the protections that were established in the supremacy of God and the rule of law. That's a simple thing. It's not about separation of church and state. Let's have that. No problem.
And so these parties, the Conservative Party, the People's Party, you would say what? That they're sort of they're not really addressing these issues?
Well, they're not. The Conservative Party's not at all. In fact, it wasn't very long ago I was inside the Conservative Party, and they, let's look at the policy convention they sent everybody to from all over the country, and they brought all these great policies, including people within the Conservative Party seeking restrictions on abortion. And they worked all weekend and did all this great work and created all these great policies that aligned with the people in their electoral district associations. And Pierre Poilievre showed up and said, basically, thank you very much, but there's absolutely no guarantee that any of this policy work will ever make it into an election. So you've got to ask, well, what's the point? I mean, it's like creating a playroom for kids who don't really ever get to come outside of the kindergarten walls and have their views heard. And that's exactly what's happening. The party has shifted from being a grassroots organization where the people at the electoral district associations push their interests and concerns up into the party. Now the party's pushing their policy statements and positions for uniformity down into the electoral district associations across the country. There's been tons of political orphans made across this nation. And really part of what I'm doing is gathering them up and getting people to have some faith again in the political process, because a lot of people think that the country's done. And until we actually start having these conversations and getting real with the, what's the real marrow of the issues, we're just gonna drift around. All we'll ever talk about is axe the tax. Of course, we should axe the tax. It's like Trump said on his one of his speeches yesterday. He says, "Yeah, we have inflation. We need to fix it." But how many times can you tell people that the price of an apple's gone up? Yeah, it has. But let's fix the economic stuff. We are a super wealthy nation. Those issues can be fixed. What are the threats to this nation are the undermining deconstruction of our sovereignty and our value framework, because that's what is criminalizing parents who try and stop their kids from going trans. That's Bill C4. That's what every member of the Conservative Party, except for maybe the last one or two that have come in through by-elections, voted for in December of 2021. Those are value issues. I've been all across this country back and forth for 2 years, and I haven't stood in one room of Conservative people where when they realize that they're going to jail for trying to stop their child or their grandchild from cutting off their penis or their breasts, that they're not upset about that. That's a value discussion. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you will never be able to breastfeed a child if you've removed them. So it's not just about the tax. Yes, we can deal with the carbon tax. We can tidy up our income tax system, our corporate tax system, and become competitive again. We can get our energy sector moving. We can go return light industry and innovation. All great things. But these value frameworks, I'm not okay with the normalization of pedophilia in our country. I'm not okay with the sexualization of our children. And a lot of Canadians aren't. But they're scared or have been scared to talk about it. And now they're not. They're coming out. Starting to deal with it. And yesterday was a big day for these conversations because we just had Trump tell the world that he's not accepting DEI in the government and that there are two sexes, male and female. Wow.
So, yeah. I mean, dramatic change, huge shift.
In a way that was our 15 years ago.
Did you say 15?
10. 15 years ago. I mean, we didn't have a discussion about whether there were, other genders. We talked about a male and a female, and then we talked about people that maybe were challenged or confused.
Yeah, I'm having trouble putting a date on it, but maybe I'm just too disengaged.
Well, I think when did it really start? Probably started ideologically 2012, 2014. Justin Trudeau came in 2015, and then it went on steroids. Mm-hmm. Pardon the pun.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Yeah, I mean he's been the poster boy for all of this, really. Yeah. So the PPC issues like abortion, you think they're just sort of paying lip service to some of this stuff and don't really mean what they're saying, or maybe just not addressing it at all?
The abortion question is a great question with the PPC. I'm on Twitter, and I have PPC soldiers that show up and kind of try and have these conversations with me. And I've looked on the PPC website. I don't see anywhere on the PPC website in its policy statements where it says that it's pro-life. It talks about being pro-family, and I think there's some pro-life candidates that are in the PPC that like to talk about the party being pro-life, but I don't actually think the PPC is pro-life. I mean, that'd be a great conversation to have Max on here and clarify. I know that when there was a Manitoba by-election, that was one of the main issues that hurt the PPC because Max couldn't actually clarify his position clearly on whether he was pro-life or not. Mm-hmm. And that's a great question, Rick, because how do you actually say you're pro-life and say we're going to protect the sanctity of the unborn, and then on the other hand say we're also libertarian, which is the optimization of personal freedom? I mean, and that is the crack in the house of the PPC, and I'm not building on a cracked foundation. So that's another reason why we're having that conversation. You cannot reconcile a libertarian position with a value statement that says we're going to protect human life at in vitro.
So that's how you see the PPC as sort of a libertarian, not so much a populist party? Well,
it is populist, but its ideological framework that it gets riled over is when you actually challenge this coexistence. Because listen, I was around and understood when the PPC emerged. I thought it was a great thing. I looked at it really closely. I felt the constrictions happening culturally in our country without maybe having the same depth of perception that I do now, and that caused me to write the book. So I kind of, rallied to the freedom thing as well. And I think a lot of people did. And people came from many, many views to the concept of freedom, because we all want that as human beings. And so if you look at the PPC website, I haven't looked at it for 6 or 8 months anyways, but it says the PPC is a party that's built upon conservative and libertarian ideology. So there's the monikers for how the organization works. And I think what happened was there were a lot of people of faith who didn't necessarily think through the issue of abortion or life type issues like that, who came in because we were all gagging for a discussion about freedom, because we felt it and we sure saw it with COVID. But the freedom discussion became not enough. And when things got interrogated, like I've just broken down here between an optimized personal choice framework that emanates from libertarianism or ultimately humanism, then you have a very hard time making an argument at the same time and saying, well, look, we value life because we believe we're created in the image of God, and because we believe we're created in the image of God, therefore life has inherent value, and it shouldn't be killed. So how do you cannot reconcile that? That's a conversation I'd love to have with Max and I, if he'd ever talk about it, because a lot of Canadians need and deserve to have clarity brought around that issue.
So how would you frame the ideology of your party?
I think that when it comes to the value framework, I'm into small government. I'm not into government reaching into life choices that people would choose to make. And, like they would have talked about it in the 60s when they were walking through this on a classical level. We're not concerned about what's going on in people's bedrooms as a government. But when it comes to this discussion around us, worrying about immigration and not having enough people, why are we aborting so many of our own babies? Why aren't we putting policies in place to actually validate life and provide economically for young mothers so they can have their baby and the country can be built healthily and happily? It doesn't have to come back down to this whole restriction of, saying to a young mother that has a baby and she's worried about the economic security of herself and or that child, and her choice is abortion or maybe a very difficult economic reality, we should be stepping in and saying, that life has value. Let's contribute to this situation and actually support it because we value life. And I don't think, I have probably the battle-hardened perspective now of having had dozens, if not hundreds of conversations across this country. Wherever the line is on abortion, I haven't met anybody that's okay with aborting a baby at full term while being birthed. And we can do that.
It's end-of-life discussions, too, I think, as a values thing. MAID, medical assistance in dying. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I don't think that life should be hastened. I don't really. I believe that there's hospice care and there can be pain management. I mean, what was the last statistic that I read on this? I mean, since 2015, I think it was 2016 that MAID started in both Canada and in California. California's had like 900 MAID deaths, same population as Canada, and Canada is over 50,000. It's like
is that fifth, right? 50,000 now?
Over 50,000. It's like the fifth highest cause of death in Canada right now. If I read that last article right. So I mean, we've gone berserk on that. We have a death cult in this country. So why? I mean, look at our streets. Look at the drug situation with fentanyl and people dying. We're not even talking about all of that. We're afraid to have these conversations, and this stuff, people need to be cared for and treated with dignity. But this value system that allows this to happen is not what's resonating with people across the country. They want it fixed. And the problem with this conversation in some ways, Rick, is even the concerns that you're raising is by having value conversations, you're inherently coming down with a big no hammer. Like that. If you and I are being honest about this conversation, the kind of anxiety that you're raising with some of the things that you and I are talking about right now is that there's going to be this impeding no, that it becomes a control level. What I'm actually wanting to do is protect life and get the government shrunk and out of everybody's business, so we can get on with life and build prosperity and security in the same way in the nation that you and I grew up in. So let's not stifle. Let's protect life. Let's isolate that conversation and say, yeah, we're going to protect life for sure. But that, just because we're saying no to full-term abortion, doesn't mean that we're going to have everybody lining up on their curbs for some kind of roll call at 8:30 in the morning every day. Like, let's be intelligent about this conversation. That's the value conversation. The rest of it is let's get government out of the way and get rid of this stifling, smothering government that we now don't trust.
But I mean, the counter argument to that, or I guess the counter concern, I think, is maybe the better word to use, is that you're talking about getting rid of stifling government, but at the same time, by bringing the no hammer down, some people would say that's that's authoritarianism, or a coercive government in itself. What no hammer? No to abortion, no to MAID, no to transitioning from one sex to another with children, those kinds of issues.
What I'm saying is, right. I'm saying no that the government should not be impeding parents from stewarding their children in life decisions, right? We don't let our kids play with guns. We don't let them play with rat poison. We don't let them drive vehicles. We don't let them, join the military, but we're going to let the state remove the parental authority to take decisions about them mutilating their genitalia.
Right. So it's a question of balance, right? And
sure.
Scope. Sure.
So look at where we've got by saying yes to everything. We've come to the darkest place in our nation's history because we've lost the ability to say no. So do we just continue into chaos?
And in that, there isn't really freedom either, right? By being too permissive.
At some point, there comes slavery. Yes leads to slavery. And we've already kind of had the foretaste of that, haven't we? I'm thinking about that mom in Chilliwack that gave $50 to the convoy and had her account frozen. You want to keep saying yes to things? I'm just talking about one subset of valuing life. I'm pro-human. I want to see life thrive. The rest of it is the government needs to shrink, and we want to see the government move closer to the accountability of the people. Power needs to get back to the people. We need to move the authority back to the provinces, and we need to fix these systems that have led us to this sad place.
So as much as you want these constitutional changes, systemic changes, to reform Canada from a parliamentary democracy into a constitutional republic,
constitutional monarchy.
Constitutional monarchy?
That's what it is.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I can accept that. But the point is, you're still pro-Canada. You still want the country.
Absolutely. I'm saying we need to move from this vulnerable space as a country and build a nation. We need to secure our borders. We need to strengthen our military. We need to define the framework that's going to allow our people to thrive and prosper and flourish, to allow families to grow and be secure, to allow wealth to transfer to the next generation without having it eroded constantly by taxes or capital gains or starting to tax personal residences, whatever. Those things we want to protect our country, and we want to unleash our economy for the people.
And I hear people talking about our economy, our economic system, What are your views on that? And that's a pretty broad subject, but I hear people saying, oh, it doesn't work anymore. It's all based on debt. It's going to fall apart. It's going to collapse. I think some of those people, honestly, are really pushing for maybe a communist revolution, and they just don't like free market capitalism. But I'm very interested to hear your views on this. Or is that question too broad for you?
I don't think it's too broad. I think we've killed innovation. There's no room anymore really for entrepreneurs. We have an industrious people that need to be provided with an economic framework to empower growth. And right now, growth is stifled. We're killing our industries. People are leaving. They're taking their marbles and leaving. And we have an amazing nation with tremendous resources, and it's essentially untapped. And one of the biggest challenges is that much of our nation is still impeded by this understanding of the framework by which we operate, which is that we're squished into this space because so much of our nation is still crown land. We should not have housing shortages in this nation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So when you say crown land, is that like are you just elaborate on that a little bit so that I understand exactly where you're going?
The last time I did some research on what land is controlled by the crown or crown agents, extensions of the crown, mm-hmm. Subsidiaries of crown land. I think it was like 93% of our nation is still curtailed by the kind of governmental subsidiarity of the crown, and no wonder we have the challenges and shortages we do in terms of growth and limitations, and these kinds of issues just need to be engaged and discussed. And the question that I have for Canadians is, why would we return to a system that we have seen is inherently broken? We have our Charter of Rights and Freedoms that have been completely abused. We have a politicized police force. We have a Supreme Court that has been taken over by a living tree doctrine that allows the interpretation of any kind of, what would I say, morphing ideological framework to interpret anything that they want to. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms clearly didn't work. Brian Peckford's case should have been an obvious case to go to the Supreme Court. It won at first instance. I think that's how it went. And when it got to, he lost at first instance. And when it got to Court of Appeal, they wouldn't hear it. So the only person in the country that can get rid of the ridiculous prime minister that we have at the moment is the Governor General, who the prime minister hires and takes advice from. And the other people that feed into the advisory committee for the Governor General is all the privy councillors. And who are they? And that's a good question for all the PPCers, because the privy councillors that give advice to the Governor General is also Maxime Bernier. So, how does that fit in with if you want to talk about the PPC, how does that fit in with the whole freedom populist grassroots movement in terms of moving to a freer Canada? So I just think that we've grown past our system, and the more that I've read about our constitutional framework, there are waypoints in our history that have created scenarios that I think were other than intended. And if you take the time to read the 1931 Westminster Act, you'll see very clearly that the construct of our constitutional framework in Canada should have looked very different than what we have now. And why is that? And the answer to that question is that some people took it upon themselves to basically perpetuate this notion of the crown and create a power epicenter in terms of Ontario and Quebec. And that's why we're in a situation right now where there's this inequality of economic power. You have Alberta being kind of vilified for whatever, being a rebel or having dirty energy. But at the same time, what was the last statistic? I think I remember right. Since 1962, I think Alberta's transferred $800 billion to Ontario and Quebec or the rest of Canada. That thread is wearing thin in terms of how the West feels about subsidizing the value lunacy that they're seeing coming out of our government, let's say, our parliamentary process. They're not okay with some of those things that we're talking about. So we're going to have to deal with that, the regionalism in these kinds of conversations. And I think we're at a breaking point if we don't fix these issues. And I think that's why we're having this conversation now. And if we want to revert back to our 51st state and President Trump, I think he's driving this discussion by simply laying down these tariffs across the infrastructure of government that is now going to hurt, because I believe they are in conflict between two value frameworks. One is moving towards a globalist project, and the other one is protecting the inherent value of people in the nation and the borders that protect them, which includes a discussion about immigration. And unless we start to see the nation through a broader lens, then we won't understand actually what's going on in our country.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, I hope that Trump isn't about to annex us and also take over Greenland and engage in expansionist activities like that. As I hope we retain our sovereignty. We're heading into an election year. We've seen Justin Trudeau resign, sort of, almost. Sort of. So where do we? Where are we at with that? Do you think, really?
I resonate with your analysis there, except that I don't think our threat to our sovereignty is from Trump. I think our threat to our sovereignty is our current government deconstructing the nation to enable us to move into a globalist, UN-controlled post-national state. And be very clear, the evidence is there. That's exactly what Justin Trudeau said, and all of the evidence flows to support that very clear statement that that's where we're going.
I think I'm just doubly paranoid because I see threats on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Yeah. I fair enough. And I mean, that has been the nature of our relationship as a nation right from pre-Confederation in terms of existing in this space with a much bigger, stronger, older brother. And I believe in the kinship of our people and the goodwill that I sensed even having this conversation this week down in the U.S. about what Americans' perceptions are about what's going on. And I think there should be some comfort taken that the rhetoric that Trump was unfolding earlier about, taking the Panama Canal and Greenland and all that, and Canada, he's way backed off from. But I think he is serious, and I think we need to take a serious look as Canadians at what is going on at our borders in terms of what's coming in and what's flowing down. And I think we also need to recognize that whether you believe it or not, Canada, that there are foreign troops in our country or threats that could flow from our nation to the U.S., the Americans think that they're there.
And so, what do you think? Do we or do we not have Chinese troops?
I believe that there's foreign troops in this country. And I think that there's legislation called the Foreign Interference Protection Act that Stephen Harper put in place to allow for that. I just don't know the scope of it. And I've heard some pretty big numbers in terms of the American military intelligence apparatus assessing what they think is embedded in Canada that could be a mobilized risk to American. And so whether we think that's real or not, I tend to think that it is. I just don't know the scope, but I know for sure that they think it's real.
Well, perception becomes reality if they believe it, and they could act on that, I suppose. And I've seen things. I've been warning people, though, for 2 years that this was coming, that Canada was in play, because I could see trial balloons being sent out by social media influencers. So I won't get into that, but I see the threat on both sides for exactly the reason that you're speaking of right here. Lieutenant Steve Rogers, SOS campaign, getting Canadians to send letters to the U.S. government asking to be basically rescued or liberated. And I said, what are you doing? You're inviting the United States to take military action to come and save Canada? What is that all about? And people thought that the people sending the letters were serious. Other people didn't think it was a serious thing, but this gives them justification because now they can say, I mean, it was just that things like that were happening. And I don't think that that's a joke. Nor was it a joke when Tucker Carlson said, we're coming to Canada to liberate you when he phoned the Prime Minister's office. I mean, it's a joke, but not a joke. And here we go. It's a joke from Trump, but not a joke.
Right now, I'm choosing to believe that posture is set in place to destabilize what President Trump knows is the actual threat, which are people that are betraying the security of Canada and in a sense the continent by moving towards post-national states, a state that's controlled by foreign interests or bankers via foreign interests. That is what he is warring against. It's exactly what it is. We have it embedded in Canada. When we get the flag raised up about post-nationalism, we need to understand what that means. It means the betrayal of our people and our land. And until we actually sober up and look at what that means as a nation and, pause and reflect. That's why I actually wrote the book, so people could see what the implications of that mean and correlate it to what we've seen as an unfolding story in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Until you see that, you won't really understand. So yes, there's always been American expansionism. It's part of the ethos in the nation. But I also believe that we have boundary stones that have been set in place in this country, and they will be respected. But we've got to deal with our own backyard. And right now we have a government that doesn't want to, because it's actually complicit to the betrayal of the nation because of its policy of post-nationalism. And we have the loyal opposition who's afraid to talk about anything other than axing the tax, when they should have been responsibly engaging in all of these discussions in relation to, hey, Justin Pierre or Justin Trudeau, what can you tell us what post-nationalism means? What was it when you said, what does it mean when you did that little clip from the UN in November of 2018 telling that Canada is going to be the first post-national state? Why don't you explain that? Why? Oh, hi, David McGinty. You went on YouTube in the spring of 2020 to tell the nation that there was ample evidence of a severe and sustained risk by foreign interference that seeks to undermine our politic and our democratic institutions. Hello, why wouldn't you tell us that? We've had 5 years of silence from the Conservative Party. We've had 2 federal elections, and we've had 3 Conservative leadership races, and there hasn't been one raising of that issue. And right now we have Pierre Poilievre that won't even get his security clearance to attain the information. I understand he's had a briefing 6 or 8 weeks ago, and we still don't know who the potential 11 people are that CSIS has identified. I mean, I comment on that in my book as well. I mean, there was a CSIS whistleblower that came out and tried to tell the whole nation about this, and he got slammed by Justin Trudeau, not because of the information that he was disclosing to actually protect Canadians. He got slammed because he told Canadians that they're being undermined. And then we're just drifting along and accepting this pathetic and impotent opposition party who isn't protecting our interests. And we just come to whatever the Kool-Aid fountain is. Well, not me. Come to the Kool-Aid fountain and say, okay, all we got to do is get rid of Justin Trudeau and axe the tax and don't split the vote. No. It's actually time to split the vote. And I'll tell you something else in my view in relation to the analysis of what I think is how things are going to play right now, and unless there's another intervening or interesting event that kind of wobbles the country. We now have a Mark Carney coming into leadership in the Liberal Party who will actually pull away all of the, let's say, the blue Liberals and the red Tories away from Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party are actually now at risk potentially of losing the election. And if they don't lose the election and make it, they may have a minority government. So their entire padding is migrating away because Mark Carney's a lot more credible economically, certainly, than Justin Trudeau. And I think more than the tin voice of Pierre Poilievre sloganeering. That now makes the entire Conservative caucus seats out there very vulnerable to the emerging block of Canadians that actually are starting to understand what's going on and is feeding the growth of the United Party of Canada. So I can't wait to have these conversations, depending on when the election is. That's where that's how many seats we know that we'll be contesting. But those conversations are happening, and I think it really provides an opportunity for those conversations to happen locally, because I know that there are a lot of people from what I would call the conservative bent parties, and I mean the CPC, Conservative Party of Canada, and the PPC, coming into our ranks, in addition to the political orphans that disconnected from this conversation because they saw that the whole system was broken. You actually have real conversations with people and look them in the eye and tell them the truth. They know if you're BSing them or not. And so I'm seeing hope coming back into the hearts and minds of Canadians and because I'm engaging the conversations that they know are the problems.
So where is your party at in terms of organization and recruitment of candidates?
We are in the midst of recruiting candidates now. This is an invitation for people that are listening to this interview to look at our website and engage. We will be running candidates from across BC right now to Nova Scotia. I'm not saying we have like 200 seats yet, but we're building. And my point for Canadians and all the conservative thinkers out there that say, well, we don't need to split the vote. Here's my challenge to you. My challenge is, look at how screwed up Jagmeet Singh was able to screw the country up by having 12 or 14 seats, by propping up Justin Trudeau. And imagine if we actually had a block of seats like that could start to return conservatism to these serious conversations in the nation. We could change the country and bring the country back to the nation that we want to see built. So anyways, there you go. There's the website. Thank you for that.
Yes. So if people want to go to unitedpartyofcanada.ca, you can find out more about the party platform. There is also a place here where you can find out how to volunteer, you can donate, and also, I guess, sign up as a candidate or at least apply to become a
start
candidate.
Conversation as a candidate. And I mean, we're building like crazy. We're having conversations across the country like crazy. And, it's a bit frantic because we don't know when the election is. And the longer the runway is for us, the stronger we're going to be for that election. So this is where it's at. But I mean, this is why conversations like this, Rick, are so important for us, because we're actually getting out the real issues so people can actually interrogate them and say, you know what, I really like that, or I really don't like that. And that's what it's supposed to be about. People shouldn't be left guessing about what the real agenda is. I mean, people are still talking online about whether Pierre Poilievre is in support of the WEF. We don't know. Right. And for me personally, I saw the website in 2020, 21. And then after that, it was gone, so those are legitimate questions. Why aren't we having those conversations? Anyway. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to plunge into. I like your question about the PPC. It's something that I get asked a lot. I love having that conversation. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I do my own Twitter. It's at Grant S. Abraham. And, you can engage with me there. Lots of PPCers do, but they, this last, 6 weeks, maybe they've stopped for whatever reason. Maybe they're tired of getting the answers that they're getting from me. I just think we need to have these conversations and actually It's the value conversations that's going to make our country great. It will define what we say yes or no to, and just dumbing the nation down to just a conversation about economics does not produce a great nation to be proud of. Right? We've got to deal with these issues. We've got to have the conversations, and a lot of the immigrants that I talk to are frustrated because we're not taking care of these issues. So this fear of actually having these important conversations cannot rule the nation. It cannot. Fear cannot be allowed to be the value that allows this nation to move forward or grow, because it won't. It's going to limit us, and it's going to divide us.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add or think that we might be missing tonight?
I don't think so. I just think this is a tremendous time right now in our nation to watch what's going on. And my encouragement would be for Canadians not just to be reactionary to some of the things that Trump is saying, but think and understand that he has had access to some of the most relevant intel in the world in the last 8 or 10 years. And he actually knows where the threats are. And he's identifying them and removing them and seeking to do that in his backyards. And why isn't he having obvious conversations with the Conservative Party right now? That's a good question for Canadians, and I think that's why we're having this conversation, because it can bring an illumination and help people to see and think differently. And my hope is to allow Canadians to look at this problem, the challenges that we're having as a nation, from a bigger lens, from a higher altitude, and see what's going on, what's playing out in the U.S. in terms of, light and darkness, good and evil, deep state versus the republic, the freedom of the inalienable rights of individuals. We're having the same conversation in Canada. We're having it privately, though. We're just timid to have it publicly because we're fearful, and we shouldn't be. We should, be taking courage, and that's where I'm grateful for you and others like you in this country that are actually prepared to air this kind of conversation for Canadians.
Well, Grant, I'm grateful for you coming and joining us on the program tonight. As I said, I think your voice is important. I'm glad that you were sharing your views here tonight, and we need to have you on more often. Absolutely. So thank you, sir. I'm going to let you go. It is the bottom of the hour, and I'm going to continue with the other news of the day on the other side. Right. But thank you so much, Grant. Yeah. All right, Grant Abraham, everybody.
Look forward to it, and happy to come back.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, guys, and stay with me. I will take a short break, and we'll come back after this with today's top news stories.
Someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching. The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching. Maverick News.